Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Setting Up and Test Driving Your Website. So before we get started, we want to cover just a few housekeeping details, and then we're going to dive right in. First up, all of your mics and phones are muted, so you should be entering your questions in the chat window. The chat window is where you may have already been entering in where you are hailing from and your name. So continue to use that feature to ask your questions as the webinar goes along. You don't have to hold your questions until the end. Devin is our star chat helper today. He is one of our ClubExpress team members, and he's going to be answering all of your questions. So again, make sure that you're entering those questions in the chat window. A recording of this webinar will be available before the week is out on our YouTube channel. So we'll give you instructions on how to access that in just a moment. You can, of course, find all of our recorded webinars and our tutorials on our YouTube channel. So let's talk about some of the other content that you can access from ClubExpress. For all of our upcoming webinars, be sure to visit clubexpress.com/calendar, or just go to clubexpress.com, select the calendar option on the menu, and you can see a list of all of our upcoming webinars. Our webinars are, of course, free. You don't have to register for them in advance, but if you do, a bonus of that is that you are able to enter in notes and questions and things that you'd like to see demonstrated in that upcoming webinar. So if you see a topic and you might have a handful of questions or things that you'd like to see addressed, feel free to enter those in with your webinar registration. And as I said before, all of our tutorials and webinars are available on our YouTube channel. So if you are viewing this as a recording, or if you're looking at any one of our other great videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button. That's not just so that we can get more YouTube subscribers, it benefits you. You get notified as soon as we upload a new video tutorial or a new webinar, so you can stay up to date on all of the features that we're adding. When you're on YouTube, either from our videos, or if you're just searching for us, you'll search for clubexpress.com with dots spelled out. And of course, if you are using ClubExpress already, and in particularly if you're enjoying using ClubExpress, we would love to hear from you. Go to clubexpress.com/reviews and leave a review about us on any one of the sites that you see listed. We would absolutely love to hear from you. So in today's webinar, we're going to go over setting up your brand new website and something that may have slipped off of your radar, which is testing your new website and how to come up with a test program that you can use to make sure that your website is going to function as well as it can from day one. So first, I want to say to anyone here who is a new or relatively new ClubExpress customer, welcome. We're really glad that you're here, and hopefully this webinar is perfectly timed for you. So the idea of setting up a brand new website obviously can be really daunting, especially if that's not your day job, like a lot of us here at ClubExpress, but it doesn't have to feel like you're getting teeth pulled. So we're going to talk about getting your new website up and running. We're going to talk about setting up that testing process. And when we talk about testing your website, we're definitely talking about more than having your board of directors poke around to make sure everything looks okay. We're talking about a real test process that you can create to, again, make sure that your website functions for you, for your other administrators, and for your members. So to go over what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about our setup checklist and trial mode. So when you sign up for a free trial with ClubExpress, you are initially going through a setup checklist. We'll talk about the checklist. We'll take a look at what is included. And then your site moves into trial mode, where you get to experience ClubExpress for a free trial for 60 days. We also are going to talk about what happens while you're in trial mode, or what should be happening, talking about setting up that test process where you're defining your core group of testers, defining those testing parameters, and then what happens once you're done testing, implementing any changes, cleaning up any testing. And also we'll talk about that last step, which is the one to really It's the one that really trips a lot of people up, which is actually going live. It's the final step. It gives a lot of people a little bit of anxiety, but we're going to make sure that you have all the tools that you need so that, again, it's not something that you have to hate looking towards. So let's talk about our setup checklist. Now, the setup checklist is usually completed by a single administrator, and it's likely the person who signed up for ClubExpress from the start. It's including basic information just to get your website going. And we're going to take a look at the setup checklist on one of our demo clubs in just a moment. It's going to include really basic things like your organization name, your address, the modules that you want to use, member types, renewal settings. You'll take a look at your homepage. Now, when you're going through the setup checklist, it's important to think about where you're coming from. Do you have a website now? Or are you using something really simple like a Facebook group or page? So think about what's available on your current site and whether the features that you want on your site are included or not. Because remember, regardless of where you're coming from, whether it's a WordPress site or maybe it's another association management system, there are likely a lot of features that perhaps you didn't have before that you want to implement now. So really taking stock of what's important to you. And you've likely already done this as part of your exploratory phase. So when you're shopping around for an AMS software, you likely have that list of things that are super important to you already. So thinking about things that may not have been on your site that you want to use going forward. So for example, your current website might not have a calendar, you use Eventbrite or something similar to manage your events and registrations. Make note of everything that you have that you want to replicate and your hopes and dreams for the future. So thinking about the future can be useful for everyone, regardless of the website that you have currently. So let's say that you are a small organization without a website and you're using a Facebook page for your club. There are probably a lot of features that you don't have that you want to implement and use. So you might consider a different approach. Maybe instead of implementing everything at one time, you might delay rolling out a feature or two to let your users get used to the new website first. So we're going to talk about a little bit of that as we go through this process. And it also helps from an admin perspective too, because your admins then don't have to know how to do everything right from the start. Now, this works for organizations which have a more robust site as well. So even if you have all of the same features, whether they're built in or not, they're likely going to function differently from your ClubExpress website. So keep in mind that there's a learning curve for everyone, members, admins, and you may not want to overwhelm them with so much information at one time. And it's also important to note that every item on the setup checklist can be edited at a later date. So that means that you don't need to activate every module that you want right now. There isn't a time limit on when you have to activate modules by. So you can determine that maybe you want to wait a year or 2 years to activate discussion forums. You can change member type configurations. You can change renewal settings. All of these things can help you go through and implement what's most important to you now, and then implement the rest later. So let's take a look at one of our clubs that is currently in what's called setup mode. So when you first sign up for your ClubExpress free trial, you are automatically entered into setup mode. You entered in some really basic information in a pop-up window when you signed up for a free ClubExpress trial. And all of that information is saved for you under your club info name and description. So that's your club name, your address, your mailing address, a general email address that you can use for your club. Now, when you signed up, you may have entered in a personal email address. That's completely fine. You can always change that later. But remember, if you did enter in that personal email address, definitely double check that and change that before you go live. So again, all of these things can be edited at a later time through the control panel. And we're going to talk about the control panel in just a minute. We have our subscription agreement, our privacy options, and member types. And you'll also notice that next to each of these, there is a question mark icon. These question mark icons are going to become one of your best friends while you're going through and setting up your new website. They're going to take you to context-sensitive help within our help system. So if you're having trouble creating your member types, all you have to do is select that question mark icon. And we're going to talk about our help system and how helpful it can be for you during this process. Let's take a look at selecting web pages. So selecting web pages, we'll go ahead and log myself back in there. So selecting web pages is going to take us to a giant checklist of all of the modules that are available. Now, this looks a little bit different than enabling and disabling modules from within the control panel. So this particular page is a really simplified way to activate modules that you're going to use on your site. Now, we have a couple of tutorials and webinars available on how to fully use the control panel on your site. So if you are past setup mode and you are now looking at a control panel when you sign in as an administrator, we'll talk about how you might set up those modules at a later time. But let's focus on just getting set up. So all I have to do is just check off the modules that I want to actually activate. So let's say that I'd like donations, maybe I'd like blogs and events as well. I don't have to check off everything. In fact, I only have to check off maybe one of those items to move forward. And now I get a little check mark that indicates that I have completed that item. And again, I can always go back and change those features. Now, these are not the only things that you'll want to do when you're setting up your site. These are the very basic things that we ask you to do to at least get your site going. So you're setting up your member types and your renewal settings. Setting up your member types is going to be really helpful when you enter into trial mode and you start adding a handful of users to poke around and test your site. Setting up your people options and your renewal and expiration settings, all of those things are sort of the basics that you need to, at the very least, have members uploaded to your site so that we can map them to those member types and have your members at least be able to check their member profile, check when their membership might be expiring. Again, these are really basic things. Your website look and feel, what your website actually looks like, what the fonts are like, what your headings are like, what your experience is like as a user. Setting up your web pages, those are the modules that we talked about. Now, there are more than 20 different modules that are included with your ClubExpress website. You don't have to implement them all, but they are all included, and there isn't a fee to check off any one of those boxes. So it's not like ordering a pizza where toppings might be extra. Those are items that are all included in your site. And then you, of course, think about your menu. Now, we're going to talk about website navigation in just a moment, so we'll come back to this. And we're also going to talk about your homepage. But taking a look at this particular list, you might think that it still seems like a lot of information to have to put in. But keep in mind, and if you have signed up recently for ClubExpress within the last year or year and a half, you may have noticed that once you sign up, you start to get a series of very bright and colorful and fun emails that essentially walk you through the journey of building your site. So that's something that we at ClubExpress had started to implement to help you get to know your site a little bit better and to help push you through your setup and trial mode with a little more hand-holding. So pay attention to those emails. They won't come to you every day. They'll come every few days, but those emails are actually going to help you stay on track to have a successful launch in a timeline that might seem unachievable, but with just a little bit of help and with the help of your testers, of course, you can get your website up and running in just a handful of weeks. And of course, as I mentioned, you have access to a lot of help. Even when you're just going through the setup checklist, you have not paid for anything yet, but you still have access to our entire support team. You can email or call our support team, and you, of course, can see their information highlighted right in the instruction list for this particular page. You can email us or call us. You can also check our online help system, our videos and tutorials that are on YouTube. All of this information is there to help you. If you are ever stuck, feel free to reach out to us. We want to make sure that your launch is successful. And so that means that your success comes from us helping you. So be sure to just reach out to us if you get stuck. Now, once you're going through that setup checklist, again, maybe you're following along with the emails that you've been receiving to check off the items on your setup checklist. Once that happens, the next phase is trial mode. Now, once you're done with your setup, again, you give us a call, we switch your website over to trial mode. And once that happens, you won't see that setup checklist anymore. Again, all of that information can be edited from the control panel. Once we switch your site into trial mode, you'll have 60 days to determine if we're right for you, if we're a good match for you. Now, some of trial mode is going to be spent putting a handful of finishing touches on your website, and some of it will be spent setting up modules, but you should still make time for testing your website with a focus group within your organization and leave some time at the end to make changes or adjustments. And we'll talk about that timeline in just a moment. Now, there are some things that aren't available in trial mode and some additional notes. So let's talk about some of the things that are not available in trial mode. So you won't be able to pay pending transactions by credit card. So that's something that you're able to do once you have a merchant account set up and you have stated that you want to accept credit card payments. But during trial mode, we just limit a couple of things for you. During trial mode, you also won't have a domain name pointing to your website. So once your website is ready to go live, and we'll talk about switching your domain name, that's when that happens. But until then, you likely still want your members to be able to visit and interact with your old website in the meantime while your new website is getting set up. Now, trial mode is limited to 8 members and 8 non-members. Now, that really is just your core group of users. It's typically your board of directors. But again, think about the fact that while your board does, of course, need to see what your website looks like, you also need to think about your core group of testers and making sure that they're going to have access to the site in order to be able to test all of the features that you have. So we're going to come back to that, but keep in mind that you are limited to 8 members and 8 non-members in trial mode. And again, this is the additional time that you have to put those finishing touches on your site because you'll already have all of those basic things set up. You'll be configuring your modules, you'll be testing. So once you're in trial mode, that's when you should really start thinking about defining that core group of testers. Now, have a group of people in mind who are willing to help test your new website. And this might be the committee that was responsible for selecting your new software. It might be just a handful of volunteers who have opted to maybe spend a few evenings testing out your website. And think about the roles of each person within your organization and how it affects the access that they might need to have. Now, in 2 weeks, we are doing a refresher webinar on the different levels of access and security roles within your website. So mark your calendars and remember, register in advance for it at clubexpress.com/calendar. Remember that when you register in advance, you can ask those questions that you would like to have included in the webinar. Now, a good rule of thumb for anyone is to try to limit the people who have full access to your site. Those are administrators. An administrator has access to everything. And the person who signed up for ClubExpress initially is likely the person who will remain an administrator. Or of course, if you are using maybe a service or another volunteer to just get your website set up, that admin role might change. There should be at least one for your website. You can have more than one. I have personally seen people have just 2 site administrators and move to more of a coordinator model. Now, a coordinator is someone who has administrative access to very specific items on your site. So let's talk about that coordinator model. Coordinators are folks who have specific admin rights over a feature or two. So for example, if your treasurer is poking around on your site, they likely don't need to have administrative access. They may only need coordinator access. So they would need to have access to the specific financial functions and features. Maybe they'd have access to emailing, but they don't necessarily need to have access to, let's say, customizing your website's look and feel. So again, we're going to talk a lot about all of those features and all of those different security roles in our webinar in 2 weeks. But to give you an idea, there are 4 separate levels that you should be focusing on within testing. Your administrators would have access to everything. A coordinator would have access to just the specific items that you want to give them access to. And then, of course, you have your members and non-members. Now, your members are the members that you have with you currently. They're the ones who are going to be using your website on a daily basis to register for events, to do really anything. Your website isn't just there to make your life as an administrator easier. It's there for your members and non-members too. Now, you don't necessarily need to pull in members who don't have an official role in your organization. You can also reuse administrators and just have them log in as a member. And we'll talk about some of that setup in just a moment here. Now, remember that your admins and club officers are members of your organization too. So they'll likely have to perform some of these same functions anyways that you're going to be testing. Now, when we talk about members and non-member access, consider if you need or want to do non-member testing, which you should consider if you have a lot of non-members interacting with your website or if site security is really important to you. Remember that with your ClubExpress site, you can have a public versus a private site. Your private site is where your members have to log in order to access that info or those features. Non-members or members of the general public simply visit your site. They can poke around, but again, they can only see what you let them see. Now, we have a lot of webinars and tutorials that discuss making things on your website public versus private. So be sure to take a look at that, but also consider who you are as an organization. If you really are a member-only organization, you're not looking to gain new members, you're not looking to really interact with the public, you likely don't need to do very much non-member testing aside from having someone log out of your site just to see what's available, making sure that non-members don't have access to your member directory, for example. And again, if you are marketing a lot of your information to the general public and to non-members, if you're a community organization, you might need to make sure that most of that information is still available to a non-member so that they don't have to log into your site. Now, let's take a look at one of our demo sites that I have here. And I want to show you just some really easy ways that you can create some of these test accounts for yourself. Now, I've logged in as Martin Smith, who is one of our favorite administrators. We're on one of our demo clubs right now. Now, I mentioned that you would have access to the control panel as an administrator. So I'm going to select that control panel link, and it's going to take me to the back end of my website. Now, just a couple of things that I want to point out to you. Here's our name and description. We can still change that. All of the modules that we've activated are now organized for us in the tab that they belong in. So if we take a look at our website tab, here's our event calendar. All of those features are still there for you. Now, what I want to do is take a look at the People tab, which is where we're going to find our People Manager, which is our member and non-member database rolled into one. Now, in the People Manager, that's where you're going to find a list of all of your members. And it's also where you're going to add additional members once you have set up your site and you're in trial mode. You, as the person who has set up the site, will be the first listed member. But of course, you can add up to 8 additional members and 8 non-members. We have convenient buttons at the very top of the screen here to show you how to do that. Here's that familiar help icon at the top right-hand corner. So if I go ahead and select that help icon, it's going to take me to our online help system just for the People Manager. So if you get stuck, be sure to double check that question mark icon. Now, if I'm looking through the list of members here, of course, this website is quote unquote live. It is a demo site, but this site has moved past its setup and trial mode. Now, what I did was I wanted to set up these test accounts. So maybe I don't want to have my administrators and coordinators testing things with their own account. Maybe I wanted to set up just some test accounts to keep things nice and tidy. So let's go ahead and search for test, because I've added all of these testers as admin test, coordinator test, and member test. So each one of these members that I've added have different functions. My member test, of course, that's going to be what I log in as when I'm testing out functions as a member. My coordinator, just what you'd think, when I'm testing out functions as a coordinator and when I'm testing out functions as an administrator. So you can use and reuse these test accounts that you've created instead of having each of your members sign in with their own username and password. It's entirely up to you, but it does help keep things straight. So if you are assigning coordinator roles to different people, it might be a little more difficult to keep track of that. And let's make this as easy as possible for you. Now, I've set up each of those test members. And let's take a look right back in the control panel. And again, we're going to talk a lot about this in a couple of weeks, but I'll give you just a brief overview of within our club tab, those administrators and coordinators. So if I select that option, I can see that in one of my administrators is my admin test account, and one of my coordinators is my coordinator test account. And again, that's just getting the basics of my core group set up. So once you've defined your core group of testers, the next thing that you need to do is develop your testing parameters. So we're going to talk about 3 basic parameters that you should be testing: your functionality, your navigation, and your user interface. So when you are testing functionality, you want to make sure that each group of testers can access the tasks that they're meant to do on your website. So that goes back to setting up those administrators and coordinators. Now, if we take a look at our coordinator test option, and I select this functions icon, it's going to show me what rights I gave that coordinator. So let's take a look at the rights that I have. We've given them access to our people lookup tool to be able to look up members, some mailing labels. And if we scroll down, they seem to have a lot of access to a lot of financial tasks. So this is our test coordinator as our treasurer. We want to make sure that they have access to everything that they need to have access to. Now, if you're testing more than one role, make sure that you either change those coordinator options or add an additional member. So add a coordinator treasurer or add a coordinator membership director. Any of those items, as much as you need in order to be able to fully test your site. Now, you want to make sure that you are focusing on the duties of each of those roles. So remember that we mentioned that even if you had those same capabilities on your previous website, the way that those tasks are performed might be different now, slightly different or entirely different. So think about asking each person within your organization who has an official role what tasks they need to be performing. What things do they perform on a regular basis? What things do they do maybe a couple of times a year? Make a list of the tasks that you expect that people will need to be able to do on your website from day one. Now, we've created a handful of common task lists for each of these functions, including navigation. So we're going to go through some of those common tasks. Keep in mind, of course, that your tasks might look entirely different, but these are some of the more common things that you should make sure that you know how to do and that function properly for you. So our top admin tasks, we've covered some of the basic officer roles. So for membership, you should make sure that you don't have an issue adding or renewing members or approving new members if you have memberships that require approval by a board of directors or by a committee. For finance, you should, of course, make sure that you know how to process a payment, make sure that it works the way that you expect it to. Communication, sending and testing emails, you do have the ability to test out your emails, build out your templates before your site even goes live. And of course, events and activities, those are some of our biggest features. So make sure that you can add an event, that you can configure volunteering opportunities, and that you don't have an issue going through those tasks. So go through the things that you normally do as part of your process for each of these, so that you know what's going to be different when you actually start using your new ClubExpress site. Remember that, of course, you're used to doing the same task for, who knows how long. Maybe it's only been a couple of years, maybe it's been 10. So just make sure that you're ready for that change. And part of being ready for that change is having folks test out that functionality for you, making sure that it works for them. Now, it's also a good idea to try and get the people who will actually be performing those tasks to test the site. Now, that, of course, comes with a couple of caveats. Not everyone might be open as much to change as some others are. So there might be a little bit of a roadblock there, but this really is for the benefit of everyone. A lot of the fear of change comes from discomfort, having to learn something new. So giving everyone on your team a little more lead time is really going to help make a difference. Now, we're not just testing functionality for your administrators, because remember, they're really only half of the reason why you have a brand new website. The other half are your members. So in testing functionality, again, you want to make sure that everyone has the right access. Now, with members, that means members logging in gives them access to member-only functions. With non-members, that means what's available when no one is logged in, what's available to the general public. If website content is meant to be private, be sure that it's included in your testing notes. Make sure that you include steps to test that content isn't available to people who shouldn't see it. So always make sure that at least one of the notes in your testing is log out of the site and see what you can find. Now, the document library is a really great example of a space where you might have a combination of publicly available documents and documents that are meant for member or admin eyes only. So ask users as part of one of your testing criteria to download a specific document. If they can't and they're supposed to, let's figure out why. These are all things that you can triage and solve before your website goes live. Because let's face it, once your website goes live, you're probably going to get a lot of questions from people. You're probably going to be dealing with a lot of things at one time. The last thing that you want to deal with is something as basic as someone not being able to download a document that you really swore you gave them access to. Now, again, if you are testing what's available as a non-member, all you have to do is ask one of your testers to log out of the site. And it's that easy to see what the experience is like for the public. So testing for non-member functionality is really twofold, depending on how you normally interact with non-members. If you're a private group, you just want to make sure that your non-members can't access content. If you do market to the public, maybe for donations, for volunteering, make sure that they can access those items. Now, on the right-hand side, you're seeing your top member and non-member tasks. And there are a couple that have asterisks next to them. And that indicates that those are member-only functions. So you won't ever have the ability to test those from a non-member perspective. Those are things that you would be testing from a member perspective only. So making sure that as a member, it's easy to sign up and that you're seeing what you expect to see when you're signing up as a new member. When you're registering for an event, making a payment, searching for other members if you're using the member directory. We talked about downloading a document. If you are allowing your members to upload their own photos to photo albums, make sure you go through those tasks yourself. It's also pretty important, and it can be really helpful if even as an administrator, you know what the experience is like for a regular member. Most of the time, a lot of administrators simply go through the admin tasks on their site and they don't spend a lot of time on the front end. They're not really down in the trenches with the rest of the members. So make sure that you at least poke around just a little bit to make sure that you have the ability to test and know what the experience is like for your members. Now, I mentioned that when we were going through our setup checklist and you're determining what information is on your menu, that we were going to talk about navigation. So let's talk about navigation. Navigation is essentially how your users are moving across your site. Navigating your website as an admin or coordinator will involve using the control panel with some navigation of your website's menu. So if we take a look at our control panel once more, again, we're back on our demo site. The control panel is how you as an administrator or even a coordinator are going to access all of the website modules, all of your databases, and all of your setup options. It's how you're going to run reports. It's how you're going to do pretty much all of the aspects of your job. And then, of course, you can always navigate to items directly from your website's menu. So thinking about navigation as an admin or coordinator is really thinking about how you're going to be able to access the things that you need to do your job. Now, whenever you assign someone as a coordinator or a new administrator, they get a convenient email introducing them to their new website. It gives a really helpful 20-minute video that gives them a brief tour of the control panel and additional functions. And it also includes all of the information that we talked about today on where and how they can find more help if they get stuck. So be sure to mention this to your testers and down the road to anyone who's going to help you with your site, that once they get assigned that role, they should expect an email letting them know what help is available to them and giving them just a brief tour of their site to get them up and running. Now, an additional function that we'll talk about in 2 weeks during our security role webinar is our website favorites function. So if I scroll up to the top of my screen here, I can see that I have a favorites list. So we'll talk about our favorites function, which is going to help your admins and coordinators navigate to the things that matter to them more easily. Now, navigating for members and non-members will make sure that it's easy for them to find what they're used to finding on your old website and find what they should be finding on your new website. Especially if your website includes a lot of custom pages, submenus, you want to make sure that anyone can find what they're looking for. Easy navigation doesn't just stem from a well thought out menu, but it also comes from well thought out menu names. So let's talk about our navigation that we've set up on this particular site. We've included everything that members might interact with under a member menu. All of these modules, all of these items are just included under members menu. So we're not cluttering up our space with a lot of different functions. We have them grouped together. We also have a full menu for just things having to do with events. We have an About Us section. So consider that a lot of organizations have an About Us submenu. Similar to our events submenu, maybe your About Us submenu includes your contact information, includes committees that you have. It might include a page about your organization's history. So when I'm thinking, I want to be able to register for an event, I'm probably going to go to my events and then go to my calendar. When I want to, let's say, download a document, I know exactly where to go. Now, there are a handful of other things that we may have set up that are a little bit different. For example, in our website modules, you'll see that we have a sponsor list. This isn't actually a module for sponsors. If I check what that module actually means by selecting this configure option, and again, we have plenty of tutorials and webinars that talk about how our control panel functions. So what I'm going to do is just look for that sponsors item in my list of functions here. And I can see that originally it was called the business directory. Well, maybe that doesn't work for my organization. So make sure that included in your testing was it easy for you to find what you needed? When you give your members and your admins and coordinators a list of things to do, one of the things you should be focusing on is, was this easy for you to do? So some of the top member and non-member tasks that you might focus on, and again, navigation is going to be different for both administrators, coordinators, and members and non-members. So members should know how to use their member profile, how to navigate to it. They should be able to search through some of the items on your website, like events and documents, find your organization's contacts. Think about if you've activated any additional modules that are what we call extra cost features. So for example, the resource scheduler is one of our extra cost features that allows clubs and associations to create resources that their members can reserve, like a tennis court, a clubhouse, or a pool. So let's check to see if your members have trouble with that. Get answers to questions about what your organization does, like local issues, et cetera. So when you're thinking about how your members are going to be interacting with your site, you want to make sure that they're getting what they need from it. Now, one way to think about this, and this is one of our tips, is to create a backstory for your testers. So let's talk about a car club. Pretend that you are a car club. Think about your longtime members. What are they going to want to do? They're probably going to want to update photos of their cars. What if they have a question that they want to pose to the rest of the club for feedback? They probably want to be able to access discussion forums. So thinking about, again, that backstory, that background, pretending that you are in someone else's shoes when you're going through and testing this out, that's really going to help you come up with that testing profile and those testing parameters. Now, another feature, and this is sort of the last stage that we'll talk about as far as testing, is testing the user interface. Pay attention to the way that your website displays what your site visitors see and how they're going to move around. Now, you might design a custom page that you really like, but once it's in the hands of the user, they might find that page a little bit cumbersome. Maybe you added a widget and didn't add it in the best place on the page. These are all things that are really hard to see when you're the only person developing a website or one of a very few people. And it also gets harder to evaluate your site once you've been in it for weeks on end. I can speak from my own personal experience. You start a project that lasts 2 or 3 months, and by the end of it, you don't want to think about that project ever again. So this is why it's helpful to bring in some additional testers and sets of eyes to take a look at these things for you. Now, when you are taking a look at your user interface and you're testing it out, we want to talk about using discretion when it comes to your homepage and custom pages. Now, there is always the instinct to give as much information to people right up front as possible, but the homepage shouldn't be the only page that a person ever sees on your site. The homepage should help them determine where else they want to go on your site, whether that's your calendar, your blogs, or signing up to become a member. All A lot of organizations try to, again, cram their entire website onto their homepage. But if you put everything on your homepage, your users don't have an opportunity to explore. And of course, your website is more than just one page. So, getting feedback on not just the way your website functions, how easy it is to navigate through it, but what does that content look like? Is it a little bit much? Were people looking for more information? Did they go to a page and not find what they were looking for? Were they confused by it? You also want to think about the internet connection that your users have. Now, this is something that you probably wouldn't think about testing, or you might think about it and think, well, that's their problem. But let's think about it as more of our problem. So, we've talked a lot in past webinars and in our bootcamp last December about designing your homepage and custom pages with your users in mind. And that includes where your users are as well. So, for example, let's take a bike club. Maybe most of your users are accessing your website from a remote location, middle of a forest preserve, middle of a trail. Include that in your testing notes. Does it take a long time for certain pages to load on your site because you've used really large images and these folks are accessing your site from a really remote location on a mobile phone? Do you have too much text on a page that seems a little bit long or excessive for someone to read on their phone? Think of other ways that you can present that information. Really keep in mind that if your users can't access your site when they need to or want to, they may decide not to revisit your site again because they become frustrated with it. So just keep in mind that there are more things to think about that you probably haven't thought about in the past. So some top non-member and member tasks are interacting with widgets, opening custom pages on multiple devices. Does everything lay out nicely? Does it look the way you've intended it to look? What's their experience like? Now, once you are all done with testing, think about some really basic questions that you should ask yourself. So, what are you going to do with all of this feedback? If you're testing in phases, for example, having your core group of officers test before members and non-members address their issues, make sure they're comfortable before moving on to your next phase. If you're testing all at once, focus on one area at a time and address those issues. For example, if your members think that your menu is confusing and your admins are having trouble managing event registrations, pick a task and work on it until it's complete. I promise it'll go a lot faster that way. You'll also be sort of creating a roadmap as you go along. So think about keeping track of what you're asking your users to test, because those are likely the things that you expect your members are going to want to do pretty much as soon as your site goes live. So create a roadmap for your users. For admins and coordinators, that might mean walking them through site functions, signing up for training, directing them to help instructions. For members, it might mean something as quick as editing your welcome email. And we'll talk about your welcome email shortly. Consider hosting member info sessions, especially if some of the functions are going to be very new to your members, like registering for an event or posting in a discussion forum. Treat testing your website as a necessary step before going live so that you and your team can try to anticipate and solve those problems before they actually happen. Now, let's talk about our timeline. We've created just a sample timeline, and this seems like it might be a little bit fast. How can I possibly get a website up and running in 8 weeks? Well, it's actually possible. So remember those emails that I spoke about at the very top of our session today. Those really fun and colorful emails that are designed to help move you through setup and trial mode. If you follow those emails as they're sent to you, so they're going to be sent to you over the course of the first few weeks, every couple of days, you'll have a website that's ready to go in just a handful of weeks. So think about week 1 and week 2. You're completing that setup checklist and you're entering into trial mode. that's when your clock starts ticking for that 60 days. So 60 days is technically 8 weeks, but you're a little bit ahead of schedule because you've already completed your setup checklist and you've already started to work on trial mode options. Now, weeks 2 and 4, that's when you should be thinking about your core testing group, when you should be continuing to fine tune your site and get it ready for testing, and thinking about your testing outline. So we've talked about some of those common tasks that you're going to want your users to test. This is when you need to start making that list, coming up with that schedule for them. Weeks 4 and 6, that's when you'll be testing and getting feedback from your users. And then finally, once your testing is complete, that's when you start to implement your changes based on your feedback. And drum roll, please, that's when you go live. So I can sense that a lot of people got a little bit scared as soon as I said go live, but let's talk about going live. It's actually not a scary process. Going live, there are a handful of things that you should anticipate. And we're going to talk about these things, but I also want to direct you to a special spot on our help system. So when I am on our help system, which is just help.clubexpress.com, right at the top left-hand corner, I have a getting started section. So this is for anyone who is new to ClubExpress. Now, when I select that, it's going to give me a handful of additional options. So if I'm really, really at the start and I just want to learn a little bit more, I can learn more about ClubExpress. I can learn more about the free trial that I'm in and configuring the basic information on my site. But let's talk about launching the website. This is what we want to take a look at when we're ready to go live. So when I select launching my website, I have a note at the very top about going live. And then once I've gone live, some additional things to keep in mind. Now, the main tasks that you should focus on when you're going live would be loading your member and non-member databases, switching your domain name, purchasing an SSL certificate, and entering in your banking information. Now, loading your member and non-member databases, that is not something that you have to worry about a ton. We do that for you. All you have to do is provide us with your member and non-member databases. And that means that no matter what package you purchased, whether it was a basic setup pack, a pro pack, we upload your database for you. So if you take a look at loading the membership database, and again, this is just on our help system under getting started and launching your website, loading our membership database, at the very bottom, we see an admin note for some additional, more detailed information on what we call bulk loading, because we're loading all of your members at one time. So if I select that link, and we'll get out of our related topics, I see just a sample of what my data should look like. And I also have another admin note that includes the template that I'm supposed to use when I provide that database to our support team. So again, this is just a list of things that you'll need to work on and get ready to go live. All it is just a member database, just one little Excel spreadsheet. And then all of your members are loaded into your database and they're ready to go. If we scroll down if we scroll up just a little bit, switching your internet domain name. This is something that you'll do right before your website is about to go live, because it's going to redirect your users from your old website to your new one if they just type in their old web address. And of course, you don't want to do that until you're completely ready to go. Now, the next item would be purchasing an SSL certificate. So if you expand purchasing an SSL certificate, we talk about the certificate, what our pricing options are. You can also access that information on our pricing page at clubexpress.com. Now, you can purchase your own certificate or a certificate through us. And then, of course, setting up merchant accounts and banking information. Now, we recently, or rather, Devin recently did a webinar on our merchant account, refunding members, processing payments. He covered all of that. So if you're determining whether you want to use your own merchant account or if you want to use our merchant account, definitely take a watch for that webinar. Check out some of the pros and cons of using your own merchant account versus using our merchant account. There isn't an extra charge either way. It's just what works best for your organization. So be prepared to make that decision, make a decision about your merchant account. And then, of course, entering in your banking information. Now, this is how we will charge your monthly hosting fee. And if you are using our merchant account, it's how we send you all of the funds that we've collected across your website. So you can expect once you're ready to go live to enter in your banking information. That's just going to include your checking and routing number for your organization and a copy of a check or a bank statement to just double check that you've entered those numbers in correctly and that we have those numbers correct as well. Now, once you are ready to go live, your members are going to get a welcome email with a handful of website details. Now, that welcome email, and again, we're right back here on our demo club, that welcome email can be customized by you. And it's definitely one of the things that you should take a look at before you are ready to hit that button. Under the Communications tab, in System Emails, if we scroll down to the very bottom of the list of these boilerplate emails that get sent out for payment confirmation or event registration confirmation, we see our welcome email. This is the email that goes out to every single one of your bulk loaded members as soon as your website goes live. It's going to include their username and a temporary password that they'll be asked to change when they log in. And it can include any information you'd like. So if I select the option to customize that email, I can see what's currently in the email now, and I can change any of that. So if I don't want to ask my members to take a look at their member directory, I can lop that out and maybe ask them to participate in the forums instead. All of this information, again, can be customized. And this is really the first sort of open door that your members are going to see to your new site. So this is maybe the first time that they're ever hearing that you're going to get a new website. So just make sure that the email reflects what you need them to do, what you want them to do, and what you expect of them. Now, I know that was a lot of information to give, and especially a lot of information to give to folks who might be brand new to ClubExpress. So thank you for bearing with me. And Devin, how are we doing on questions?
Yeah, we've got 2 or 3 we can work on right now. The one that was just put in chat is how do people turn on and off the welcome email? Like what's the process for sending that out?
Great question. So when you are ready to go live and you're really ready to hit that button, it's a quick call to support. We double check that you have all of those last minute items, that you're ready to go with your domain, with your SSL certificate, that you've determined what you're doing with your merchant account. And we send out that welcome email on your behalf. It's a quick switch on our back end, and that email gets sent out to your members.
And then someone also asked, is that email for just bulk loaded members or for new members?
So that email is going to be for your bulk loaded members only. At that point, you won't have had any new members signing up for your site. If you had, they would have found your site through another means. It wouldn't be easy for people to find a site because your domain may not have been pointing to it. So it's going to be for your bulk loaded members only. When a new member signs up, let's say after your site's gone live, that's a separate email that they'll get. And if I scroll up just a little bit, we see our new member confirmation email. So that's a completely separate email that has separate information that you can customize as well.
Okay. And then also we had someone ask a while earlier, is there a way to get back to the setup checklist after your site is live?
So there isn't a way to get back to the setup checklist, but each one of these items is something that you can configure within the control panel itself. So for example, our club info and subscription agreement, if we take a look at our club tab within the control panel, that's where we would see those additional items. We have our name and description, and we also have our joining agreement. And if we take a look at, let's say, website look and feel, that's going to be in our website tab. And all of the member related options will be in our people tab.
And then unless more come in, the only other question that I got was, do test or admin accounts count against billable memberships?
So they do count. And you have the option to remove those accounts once you're done testing. We generally would love to see more organizations keep test accounts on their books to be able to test things as time goes on, because your website is a living, breathing thing. You definitely want to maintain it. You want to keep testing things out. You want to keep your content fresh. So while you do have the ability to completely remove these test accounts from your database so that you're not charged, think about keeping them on. Think about always having those test accounts that you can go into to double check that things display properly. Especially if you're an administrator and you want to make sure that things look right from the perspective of a member, your access as an admin will always give you access as an admin. There isn't a switch to say, well, show me what this looks like from a member's perspective. So one of the things that we recommend always is maybe just having one member test account, but you always have the ability to select the active option and drop the member. And this is what you would do if you were done testing and you decided you didn't want to keep test members on your account any longer. And under my drop reason, we do have a test account option. So my apologies. I had to look for it in the list, but you can note that this was a test account and you can completely remove that test member from your database.
And then we did have someone ask to show how you get to the setup checklist while you're in setup. And then they just wanted to also take a look at the setup checklist one more time.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll go ahead and sign out and sign back in. So if I log out, and I've just navigated to my Midwest Quilters group website. So this is the same website that you'll have been visiting as soon as you signed up for your free trial. If I visit that site, it's going to ask me to log in right away. Once I log in, I can see my homepage, which I haven't actually configured just yet. And at the very top, I have a link to my setup checklist. And that's going to take me right back to the checklist. And I also have access to my support tab, which is going to include some additional information to help me out. But that setup checklist is right at the top of your screen, which will kind of help you get familiar with where you might go to visit your control panel in the future.
All right. We did have someone ask something related to events, but I think we've covered it in a previous webinar. So if you have questions about event registration, I would recommend going to our cool stuff page and looking at our event webinars or training videos.
All right.
And
well,
then
thank you.
Yeah, I think that's.
Are there more?
Sorry. No, I think we're good. I think we're good to wrap up.
Okay. We don't practice these outros, as you can tell. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. It's a lot of information, and we really hope that this helps you move through that setup and trial phase and really pull that trigger and go live with your site. So if you're thinking that this is a daunting task, rewatch our webinar, come up with that checklist for yourself and make sure that you are testing your website before you go live. So thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you in the next webinar.